Hey y'all, if you are new here, welcome, and if not, welcome back. It's me, Siege, and it's time to buckle up for a long one today. I want to give a shout out to the lovely Phyllis for requesting today's art story. Thank you so much for the suggestion, and I love you. I hope you're all cozy and ready for the story of Bigfoot. There are many cryptids called Bigfoot throughout the world, far flung from Tibet, Nepal, India, and China, though it is commonly used to describe the North American Sasquatch, which is who you'll be primarily talking about today. A Bigfoot is a heavy, bipedal humanoid ape. It is believed that Bigfoot stands at around 8 to 10 feet tall, with dense fur ranging in colors from red to white to brown. It has very large feet, which is why it's called Bigfoot. A pungent, foul-smelling odor is sometimes associated with reports of the creature as well. Some people believe that Bigfoot is the descendant of the prehistoric giant orangutan, Gigantopithecus. um, Whereas others think it descended from prehistoric hominids such as a Neanderthal man or Australopithecus. And none of you can come for my pronunciation of that. Listen, I'm an artist, not a biologist or scientist or, whatever. Bigfoot is perhaps the oldest creature to make its way into American mythology and was part of the folklore of indigenous cultures well before the first settlers arrived. The Native Americans had many names for large ape-like giants that lived among their tribes or above the mountain tree line. When America was colonized, especially the western states, many of these stories came to the forefront and were shared by the regional tribes. It was then that the stories of Bigfoot became a common part of American folklore, though it would be much later before the beast was given its name. Stories of an ape-like creature roaming the forests of North America have been around as long as some of the Native American tribes in certain areas, due to the finding of cave paintings of Sasquatch-like creatures. However, the earliest written account was made in 1811 by David Thompson, who was mapping regions of Canada and the United States of America during the time. Thompson wrote, "Spokanes believe in a race of giants which inhabit a certain mountain off to the west of us." Thompson spoke to the Spokanes, a local Native American tribe in Washington state. According to Thompson, the Spokanes told him of a race of hairy giants that lived in one of the nearby mountains, possibly Mount St. Helens or the Cascade Mountains, that would steal salmon and people while they were asleep, similar to the Osmond story in 1924, but more on that in a moment. This was also the first time a footprint was mentioned for Bigfoot. Thompson said that the giants left footprints 1.5 feet long. In 1957, a man named Albert Ostman reported being stolen in his sleep by a Sasquatch, similar to the stories of giants told by the Spokanes. He claimed that in 1924, when he was searching for gold, he felt that someone was carrying him while he was sleeping. Osman claimed when he woke up, he could see 8 feet tall Sasquatches with long arms and hairy bodies except for the padded feet, which lacked hair. Osman also stated that the Sasquatches appeared to live in a family, like modern apes. This situation is similar to modern accounts where baboons have reportedly stolen infants while they were sleeping. It is unknown and disputed why primates perform such behavior. However, it may be related to the Osman account. In the summer of 1924, prospector Fred Beck and 4 others reportedly shared a nightmarish encounter with a tribe of ape men in a Washington mountain range near Mount St. Helens. This area is now known as Ape Canyon. The group had been prospecting for 6 years in the surrounding area and had found several large tracks, the largest measuring 19 inches, by creek beds and springs. Tracks not made by any animal known to these seasoned outdoor enthusiasts. Though apprehensive, they carried on. Working on a gold claim in Ape Canyon, the prospectors shared a sturdy pine log cabin they had built. Every evening, for about a week, the prospectors could hear strange sounds around them, like whistling or a thumping, like something hitting its chest. One day, Fred, accompanied by his friend, given the pseudonym Hank in his first-hand account, headed to get some water from a nearby spring. It was here that Hank spotted a hairy humanoid creature, about 7 feet tall with blackish-brown hair, hiding behind a pine tree on the other side of a small canyon. Hank raised his rifle and fired, and even 100 yards away, Fred Beck claimed to see the bark fly from the pine tree. The large animal disappeared down the canyon side. 3 bullets, fired by Beck, flying close to it but missing their mark. The 2 brought water and their bizarre story to the rest of the group, who unanimously agreed to head home, but they would wait until the next morning to avoid being caught out in the canyon come nightfall. Night came in the canyon, with the 5 prospectors sound asleep. Their sleep would last until midnight when a tremendous thud against the cabin wall startled them awake. Hank was on the floor, covered in chinking knocked loose from the wall. Squinting through the space left by the chinking, he saw 3 ape-like creatures, like the one they had encountered by the creek. These creatures, called mountain devils by Hank, hurled rocks at the cabin and attempted to break through the door, which was braced with a pole scavenged from a bunk bed. A notable event occurred when one hairy arm reached through the gap left by the chinking and grabbed an axe by its handle, though the creature was unable to free the axe. Every prospector was armed. However, Fred and Hank were the only 2 who fired. The rest gripped their rifles in the corner. The 2 would stop shooting when the creatures would quiet down, hoping they would understand that, should they desire, they could leave peacefully. "If you leave us alone, we'll leave you alone," Hank said, "and we'll go home in the morning." The attack lasted until sunrise, and as soon as the prospectors were sure it was bright enough to see, they eased out of their ravaged cabin. Not long after, Fred noticed one of the mountain devils on the edge of Ape Canyon, about 80 yards away. He fired his rifle and this time didn't miss. The animal collapsed and tumbled down the gorge, 400 feet below. Fearing there was no better time to escape, the group retreated from Ape Canyon, bringing only what little they could fit in their packs. "It's better to lose them," Hank said, "than our lives." Fred, acclaimed clairvoyant, believes the creatures were of supernatural origin and, because of this, a body will never turn up. Similarly, the body that supposedly fell 400 feet down the gorge was never found. The cabin built by the prospectors, according to Beck, burned to the ground many years later. An explanation offered by investigators is that the 8 men were actually youth group members of a nearby YMCA camp who were throwing rocks down the canyon, unaware they were not alone. The darkness, combined with the narrow walls of the canyon, may have distorted these youths into something frightening. The first sightings of Bigfoot among the indigenous tribes that inhabited the Americas before the colonists arrived are unknown. But the first stories of encounters of these creatures were recorded in Canada by J.W. Burns. J.W. Burns was a teacher that spent many years teaching at the Chehalis Indian Reserve. This reservation is located about 60 miles away from Vancouver. While working on the reservation, he often heard whispers of stories regarding wild men, or fathers of the forest. For many years, he pushed to learn more about who these strange people or creatures were, but was denied for fear that the colonists would laugh at their beliefs. This is likely because many of the stories of sightings of ape-like giants reported by were from a great distance and were often written off as bear sightings. In addition to this, actual sightings were rare. It was much more common to simply find large tracks. Many of these track findings were often written off as belonging to bears or other creatures. After 3 years of diligent searching, he finally found the information he was hoping to find. A tale of a close encounter with one of the giant beasts by Peter Williams, a native who lived in the Chehalis Reserve. Peter told him a tale of a giant he encountered in the forest while hunting. He had almost mistaken the creature for a bear when it suddenly stood up and revealed itself to be a giant man covered in thick hair. The creature jumped from where it had been perched and started chasing Peter through the woods. It reportedly chased him all the way to his home, where it then pushed against the walls with its bare hands and caused significant damage to the property. Peter Williams was not the only person living in the Chehalis Indian Reserve to report an encounter with these incredible giants. There were many encounters with these creatures during this period of time. The encounters took place for 2 to 3 years before suddenly stopping. During these years, at least 3 different giants were sighting, including at least 1 female giant. These reports were printed in many Vancouver newspapers, as well as several magazines during the year 1929. At the time, it was said that the natives who reported the stories believed these giants could still be living in a mountain range nearby, though there were many names used to describe the creatures in these sightings. J.W. Burns reported them as being Sasquatch and solidified this as the most common name for Bigfoot in Canada. The next famous sighting would be in 1958. It was this sighting that would give us a name for the legendary forest giant of Bigfoot. Although the 1958 reports of Bigfoot weren't actually sightings, they were responsible for the name that was given to the creature. It was in this year that a man named Gerald Crew found a set of prints at a construction site in California that were obviously too big to be human, though they had very humanistic qualities. Gerald recruited a friend to make plaster molds of these footprints to use as evidence of their find. The crew story was quickly picked up in local newspapers. After being picked up by both the Humboldt Times and the Associated Press, the story was given credibility and even international recognition. Many years later, the find was said to be a hoax. When the brother of the man who ran the site died, the family came forward to say that their son had left the prints as a hoax. When the story was exposed as a hoax, many people also began to question the involvement of the editor of the Humboldt Times. Despite the new information that showed the crew story to be false, the 1958 case continued to draw Bigfoot hunters to the area and would be the case that solidified the name of the mysterious beast in history. Since these first sightings, many people have come forward with their own Bigfoot stories. Unfortunately, many of these stories either lack physical evidence or were later proven to be hoaxes. Perhaps the most famous sighting was recorded on Friday, October 20th, 1967, when Roger Patterson and partner Robert Bob Gimlin set out on horseback to Bluff Creek, California, to investigate possible Bigfoot sightings. This was an area that had only recently been opened up, having been an untamed wilderness some years prior. Roger brought his 16mm rental camera with 100 feet of film, hopeful they would find Bigfoot. Should they encounter a Sasquatch on their expedition, the two agreed only to fire if it displayed hostile or aggressive behavior towards them. Sometime before 2 p.m., the two arrived at an overturned tree at a turn in the creek. Suddenly, the horses went wild, as did Roger when he spotted the ape-like being on the other side of the creek, about 100 feet away. Patterson asked his partner to cover him with his rifle while he pursued the creature. Struggling to whip out his camera and cross the creek to get a closer look, the first seconds of the clip are very shaky. Patterson, now about 80 feet away from the creature, is able to stabilize his camera in time to catch the Sasquatch give him a look of disgust. The creature, however, kept on its path through the sandbar of Bluff Creek. Patterson's film ran out shortly after, and the Sasquatch was lost in the underbrush. After rounding up the horses, the duo returned to the sandbar in hopes of spotting the creature again. While Patty was nowhere to be found, the two did notice disturbed gravel and a large, wet footprint on a rock leading straight up the cliffside. Later, investigating the cliff, a large, wet patch was found in the mud, presumably where Patty had been sitting. Patterson and Gimlin suspect the creature was watching them for quite some time before moving on. After the expedition, the 100 feet of film consisted of about 76 feet of horseback footage and 24 feet, approximately 60 seconds, of Sasquatch film. The duo brought plaster later that day and made casts of the footprints before leaving in hopes of recruiting a search party. The two planned to return to Bluff Creek to search for their Sasquatch later that day, but warnings of heavy rain changed their minds, fearing their exit may be flooded, thus trapping them in Bluff Creek. As expected, the area flooded at night, taking down trees and destroying any evidence of a Sasquatch. Many skeptics call this footage a hoax due to the fact that many men have come forward claiming their involvement in the footage. Bob Hieronymus, a friend of Roger Patterson, claimed to have played the Sasquatch in the footage, although Hieronymus initially denied any involvement in the film and didn't testify his involvement until 1999, 32 years later. Hieronymus states that he rode out to Bluff Creek with Patterson and Gimlin and was offered $1,000 to wear the suit for a minute, though the money was apparently never given to him. To add bulk to his figure, Hieronymus claimed to have worn a football helmet, football pads, and hip waders beneath the fursuit. There are discrepancies that exist in Hieronymus' story of what the suit was made of. In one story, he claims the costume used actual horsehide, while he later claims it used dynel, nylon threads stitched to a woven cloth backing for fur. Attempting to recreate this, however, researchers achieved an effect very unlike the creature we see in the film. Philip Morris of Morris Costumes purportedly received a call one day from a rodeo cowboy identifying himself as Roger Patterson. According to Morris, Roger was in need of a monkey suit for a gag. Philip Morris claimed to have fabricated the suit we see in the footage in the basement of his shop, which he later sold to Patterson for a little over $400. However, Morris's attempt to recreate the costume produced less than spectacular results dissimilar to what is seen in the footage. There are many reasons to believe that what is seen in the Gimlin footage may be a biological being rather than a man or a woman in a fursuit. And it is important to keep in mind the time the footage was taken and the limitations of the time in regards to costume quality. First are the contours. There are several contours on the subject, notably on the back and hips, that can be observed in humans and apes. A furrow line runs to the midpoint of Patty's back before being overshadowed by a well-developed trapezius muscle. This can be observed in humans, especially muscular ones, in a slouched-over pose like Patty's. Hip contours are also present, thought by some to be a divide between two pieces of the costume, but are also seen in humans, especially those with excess weight. Patty is seen to have a head more similar to primitive man than modern man. After the prominent brow ridge, the head slopes straight back to a point. Such a head shape can be observed in other hominids. Creating a mask with these proportions proved difficult during the time. This can be observed in several films that were released in the years following. In one part of the film, Patty appears to misjudge the ground and falls with more weight than expected. This causes her breasts to move in such a way that only real breasts can. It has been attempted to create such movement with prosthetic breasts using the materials of the time. However, this failed to produce movement similar to what we see in the film. What appears to be muscle movement can be observed in the right leg of the subject in certain frames as well. And many studies have been conducted on the film subject pertaining to its body ratios in relation to those of a human being. In the analysis, it is usually concluded that the arms of the Patterson-Gimlin subject are much longer than those of a human being. While humans have arms about 20% shorter than their legs, the creature we see in the film only appears to have about a 5% difference. Many lines and contours seen on Patty only occur in humans with excess body fat. With the month of filming being October, it has been reasoned that Patty has significant amounts of fat built up for the winter season, similarly to many other animals. It has also been reasoned that Patty had such a well-developed trapezius muscle from lifting logs to find nutrients or climbing trees. In 1969, a trail of over 1,000 footprints leading through the snow was discovered in Bossburg, Washington. The tracks were 17 inches long and gave researchers the indication that there was a crippling deformity on the right foot. This analysis has given the Bossburg Sasquatch the name Cripplefoot. In 1982, prints were discovered by the U.S. Forest Service in the state of Washington that appeared to possess dermal ridges, fingerprints for the foot, and sweat pores. The footprints were found similar to that of a primate. After much analysis, many researchers have concluded that these could not have been faked. Sasquatch footprints are still being discovered every day across North America. In the early 1970s, Al Berry, Ron Moorhead, and several friends camping in the Sierra Nevada mountains of eastern California experienced what they believed to be a close encounter with the Sasquatch species. Throughout the course of several months, strange sounds were heard that carried throughout the vast wilderness surrounding their deer hunting lodge. These sounds, recorded by Al Berry with a portable tape recorder hung on a tree branch, are thought to be Sasquatch vocalizations, possibly even a language. Trying desperately to discover the hoax, Berry searched the camp, and though he found no indication of a hoax, he did discover a large set of footprints in the snow and pine mats. The freelance journalist went home stumped, still reluctant to believe that he wasn't part of some big joke. Though the creatures were heard clearly, none were ever seen. Al Berry passed away believing that what he heard in the California mountains, known as the Sierra Sounds, was the language of a very intelligent species. As mentioned earlier in this video, all across the world there are similar creatures to the North American Sasquatch. The semiquus, which, again, do not come from my pronunciation, I actually looked for this one and couldn't find it, are known of the most similar creatures to the modern-day Bigfoot. The Lumi are best known for their descriptions of these creatures. Most details about the semiquus are fairly similar to that of our folklore. There is a significant amount of variance concerning the activities that these giants participate in and what they eat. The Stiaha are creatures that fall into the more aggressive giant category. It was said that if the Stiaha heard their name called, they would come and kidnap the person who spoke of them, and sometimes kill them. The Skukuums were another type of aggressive giant that terrorized the native tribes of Washington state. These giants were thought to live on Mount St. Helens and were said to be cannibalistic and extremely dangerous. The Yeti is a giant humanoid creature that lives in the Himalayan mountains. Some people describe the Yeti as being a wild man with disproportionate sized limbs, while others say the creature is more ape-like. The wild man is a common figure in medieval European art. They often appear as hairy humanoid creatures that live in the forest and aren't knowledgeable of cultured practices. There are also stories of men who were once cultured but became cursed with madness and eventually became hairy wild men. There are many theories for the origins of the Bigfoot myths. With their widespread presence throughout the world, Some would say they serve as evidence of a creature that does or did exist. However, there are others who would say that the large number of Bigfoot-like myths were bound to be created at some point. Many anthropologists believe these myths were created out of a need to express a larger-than-life being that helped to humble people. Let me know what you think, your opinions on Bigfoot or Sasquatch or any of the other variations of giant humanoid creatures related to the story that we told today. I'd love to hear your suggestions for what you want to see covered in art stories, and I hope you enjoyed watching me create this piece. We'll see you next time.